Concerns are mounting as North Korea and Russia seek cooperation on the weapons front, with Moscow believed to be seeking arsenal assistance from Pyongyang to support its invasion of Kyiv in exchange for technology to promote Kim Jong-un's aggressive ambitions on the Korean Peninsula. So what are the broader implications of an arms deal between Pyongyang and Moscow? What countermeasures do pundits expect in the event of North Korean weapons being used against Ukraine? And essentially, what can be done to effectively address tensions on the peninsula? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. North Korea's Kim Jong-un is in Russia for talks with Vladimir Putin amid speculations of an arms deal between the two leaders to advance aggression against Ukraine. For more on these prospects, I have Professor Terence Roehrig from the U.S. Naval War College here in the studio. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Professor Terence. Professor Roehrig, of course.
Pleasure to be here in person.
I also have Professor Kim Young-jun at the Korea National Defense University live on the line with us from Washington, D.C. Professor Kim, as always, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, Professor Roehrig, we'll start here in the studio. Perhaps we could start off with a few words on the implications, the broader implications of a summit between North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Russia's Vladimir Putin on the sidelines, I believe, of an economic forum currently taking place in Vladivostok.
Yes, it's an important meeting and an important development, and I think a lot needs to be seen in the details yet, but nonetheless it is a significant move. I think that North Korea has been, on a number of occasions, trying to reach out to Russia to grow its relationship. Russia has been a bit hesitant, I think, to perhaps go as far as North Korea would like it to go. But with this meeting, Kim Jong-un gains an awful lot. The optics of this meeting, to be invited by Vladimir Putin, the photo ops that are going to come from it, being asked to give ammunition for a deal in that regard. And then on top of that, he gets paid for it. So all of those things together really make this a major development, I think, for North Korea.
Right, you mentioned being paid for it. So the speculation is that arms will be given to Russia by North Korea in exchange for technology transfer, I believe. And before we touch upon that, though, the fact that Russia is reaching out to North Korea for arsenal, for arms, according to some pundits, this itself casts a bit of doubt on Russia's military capacity. Do you share this view?
Oh, sure. This is a very interesting development in that regard. I think it's clearly an indication that Russia did not expect this conflict to go that long, and so it has taxed the supplies and inventory that they have, particularly for these kinds of ammunition that they are seeking. It also says something about their capacity to be able to replenish that, and that they have to turn to North Korea to be able to have these ammunition stocks replenished. That's a very interesting development and commentary on Russian military capability.
Professor Roehrig, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he said that the quality of North Korea's weapons are actually an open question. Could you elaborate a bit on that view?
Sure, and I think that's an interesting part of the issue I raised earlier about we have to wait to see what the details are. Because I think while it's very clear some of the ammunition elements that have been raised, small arms kinds of things, are going to be valuable and part of this deal. What North Korea has at higher levels of sophisticated military capabilities are questionable. In turn, I think it's not certain what Russia's willing to give North Korea for this deal, because I wonder if Russia is going to be willing to part with some of its most sophisticated military capability that, of course, is going to have South Korea worried most in this arrangement.
Right, so hence the devil is in the details, as you mentioned earlier then. Professor Kim, over in Washington, D.C., what countermeasures do you foresee, that is, in the case of an actual arms deal between North Korea and Russia?
Yeah, this is a very serious challenge, especially to the Iraq and Japan and the U.S. trilateral security partnership. There has been almost no military cooperation between Russia and North Korea since the end of Korean War, especially after the end of Cold War. They have only the high-ranking official visit of Russia to North Korea. That is the only one. So now it's a very important turning point, and this will be a game changer in the Northeast Asian security environment. So unfortunately, no one can stop their military cooperation, unfortunately. So the ROC needed to give some warning with the U.S. and Japan to Russia and North Korea, how much it will be dangerous and instability on the regional order. At the same time, and the ROC, Japan, and the U.S. Need to prepare military preparation against all possible scenario with more serious action.
Right, and before we delve into that then, Professor Roehrig, as I mentioned earlier, the summit, the planned summit that is, between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin is expected to take place on the sidelines of the Eastern Economic Forum, which is currently underway in Vladivostok. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular forum and what is its significance amid the current geopolitical tensions here?
Sure. It is a forum that has been taking place for a number of years. I believe the first one occurred in 2015. It's an annual forum where Russia seeks to bring together potential investors for developing the Far East region of Russia. It is an area that has perhaps not experienced the same level of economic development and is not as integrated with the Western parts. And so Putin has tried to have this forum be a way of attracting foreign investment. And it's been fairly successful in obtaining various contracts to build infrastructure, transportation, mineral extraction, et cetera. And so it's another round of that for this annual event. I'm not sure it has a significant amount of implication for the war in Ukraine and others, other than it's an ongoing goal for the Russians to build up this area, and perhaps it's a way of Putin trying to overcome what might be hesitation to provide investment into this region that might not have been there prior to the war. So I think a continuation of a strategy to build up the Russian Far East.
Right, and staying with Russia's strategy, so to speak, Professor Kim, South Korean intelligence, that is, claims that Russia has invited North Korea to join naval drills with China as well. Is this a concerning development, do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is no surprise Russia invite North Korea, especially to the Russia and China combined exercise. There is a high possibility now, even though North Korea never considered over the 7 decades, but now is a wonderful time for North Korea to strengthen their military partnership with Russia, especially, and as well as China. So naval drill could be one of them for the military cooperation aspect of the two countries. And North Korea easily able to join a military combined exercise because Russia and China already have had since the 2018. So now is North Korean time to consider military combined exercise, including naval drill, and all nightmare scenario are possible, including not just weapon exchange, but also to deploy small liaison officers each other to the headquarters of the operation command, also as well as the support of a weapon system. So now this is a very serious situation, and the ROC and Japan and the U.S. need to prepare for this new security environment.
Right. Professor Roehrig, Professor Kim just talked about nightmarish scenarios. I'm going to make one for you as well. You earlier spoke about, or cast doubt that is, on how willing Russia would be to part with its advanced weapons technology, because the idea is that North Korea would provide it with weapons and Russia would probably give it some weapons technology. Do you believe that in the case of scenario where much is departed from Russia to North Korea in terms of military technology, how worried should we be?
Well, I think it certainly would be a concern, as Professor Kim mentioned. If Russia really does go this direction in a very significant way, there are many ways this is not a good direction for the cooperation, for the technology to be to be shared. In particular, there are discussions about the space program and some of that technology that would also be related to ballistic missile technology. There's also nuclear weapons pieces to this that Russia could certainly help North Korea advance its program. So we'll see. But on the other hand as well, Russia, the more they cooperate with North Korea, the more they own whatever is going to follow in the future. And while certainly there are reasons to be pessimistic about Russia going in that direction, I'm also wondering if in the end it may not be somewhat limited. But again, the details are what we have to watch, and I could be proven completely wrong on that point.
Right, and we'll just have to wait and see then. Professor Kim, staying with weapons, though, North Korea last week, I believe, claimed that it had launched its first tactical nuclear attack submarine. What do we know about this particular vessel, and why does North Korea appear to be investing so heavily in its naval power?
Yes, North Korea now has really invested on their especially tactical nuclear submarine because it is very good effect operationally or also strategically. And North Korea nuclear capability, especially attack capability from submarine, could be a serious threat to the ROC, Japan, and the U.S. because it is more difficult to detect and deter this kind of attack rather than the same attack from the land, including ICBM. So strategic, operational, and tactical effect of this kind of attack has great advantage to North Korea. Beyond the U.S. forces in Korea and Japan, now is Guam, Okinawa, and other U.S. territory could be a target of North Korea tactical nuclear submarine attack under the lack of detection.
Right, and hopefully that will not be the case, though. Professor Roehrig, the Delhi declaration shared during the G20 summit over in India this past weekend denounced, that is, the use or the threat of use of nuclear weapons. Now, the declaration itself was referring to the situation in Ukraine, of course, but keeping in mind North Korea's nuclear ambitions, what are the implications of this particular declaration for North Korea?
Well, I think this is all part of one story, that when you look at the Ukraine crisis and how for a number of years there had been a sense that the use of nuclear weapons was going to be very unlikely and the threshold for going nuclear was going to be very high. Putin's explicit and implicit suggestions that they might resort to nuclear weapons has put that back on the table. And so I think that has raised a great deal of concern globally. But now certainly to the North Korea situation, there is concern that North Korea might have a lower threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. And so I think this is, in many respects, part of a broader concern that threshold for using nuclear weapons has been reduced, and we need to get that raised back up so that we can lessen the chance of using nuclear weapons in some future crisis,
right, of
regardless of who is on the trigger.
Right, and staying with that, Professor Roehrig, there was news today about how the IAEA had detected signs of construction and activity at the Punggye-ri nuclear test site over in North Korea. Should North Korea conduct a nuclear test in the near future, what kind of action from the international community do you believe would discourage it from pursuing its ambitions further?
Gosh, that's the tough question, isn't it?
It's a million-dollar question.
Because certainly the response up to this point has been sanctions, and that's not going to happen, or at least not in any significant way. There are a lot of sanctions already in place. Russia and China will likely not support increased economic sanctions, although I think China will be much more concerned and upset about a nuclear test than it has been over some of the ballistic missile tests. You'll have no doubt a continued ratcheting up of sanctions unilaterally from South Korea, the United States, Japan, but as a notion of deterrence, I think it's unlikely that that's going to be sufficient to deter North Korea from perhaps going in that direction again. But of course, we've been talking about this upcoming 7th nuclear test for quite some time, and it hasn't happened, and it's not clear why, but we shall see.
Right. And Professor Kim, then, what do you suggest to better address tensions here in the Korean Peninsula amid, of course, Kim Jong-un's appalling or aggressive nuclear weapons intentions?
Yes, continuous this type of military cooperation, weapon development like tactical nuclear submarine will increase the instability in the region very seriously, and it could be possible the third world war between the two sides as a new Cold War, and we have also Taiwan situation in here. So this is a very serious. So we need to prepare for two double track. One side of the rock need to increase the level of preparation with the U.S. and Japan against all possible nightmare scenario. On the other hand, the ROC and the U.S. They need to use a diplomatic channel with Russia and China to reduce or stop more aggressive military cooperation with North Korea. That is we can as the way in reducing this type of the instability.
Right, of course. And Professor Kim, this is an impromptu question, but I was wondering, as part of efforts to deal with tensions here on the Korean Peninsula, what are your thoughts about the resumption of the six-party talks that were launched back in the year 2003, I believe?
Yeah, that could be the attractive option if it's possible. Six-party talk, and now Japanese Prime Minister Kishida invite North Korea, and North Korea is very with the positive reaction to Japan, very interesting. So this type of diplomatic channel, including revival of a six-party talk, will be very much needed, especially in this situation. Nobody want war, and Putin and Kim Jong-un need to stop the aggressive military cooperation. So a six-party talk will be very much needed in this situation.
Right, I see. Professor Roehrig, ever since last year, North Korea's Kim Jong-un has been seen on public outings accompanied by his daughter Chue. Today, that is Tuesday, on local media here in South Korea, there is talk about the possibility that Chue may be considered as the person to succeed her father. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the honest answer is it's hard to know for sure. It is really a long way off in time, and so what can evolve and transpire by the time succession truly is on the table, I think is a long ways off. I have to say I am skeptical of the succession narrative. I think there are a number of questions and issues that might speak in a different direction. I think the eldest son that we have yet to see is one of the big questions, and what is his situation? How does Kim Jong-un view that as part of succession? I tend to see the Kim Joo-ae story as much more about public relations and perhaps even more of a domestic message than it is necessarily a hint to the outside about succession. But again, as with so many things in this regard, it's hard to know, and you can make a prediction on one side and the next year or two you have to retract it because you were completely wrong. But that's my sense at this point.
Right, of course. And moving forward, Professor Roehrig, earlier on you spoke about how China would be less accepting of North Korea's nuclear tests than it had been with regard to its missile tests. That being said, do you suppose a meeting, a trilateral meeting between South Korea, Japan and China in the near future would perhaps serve to ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula with regard to North Korea's nuclear ambitions?
Well, I think that is always very helpful, and I am 100% with Professor Kim on the need for dialogue. While we need to have military preparations and deterrence, there has to be dialogue as well, communication as well, to avoid the possibility of miscalculation, misinterpretation of actions, and that only happens when you have dialogue. Now, of course, we are a long way from that, at least certainly with North Korea at this particular stage in time. They have not shown much interest in that. But I hope that at some point we can move in that direction, because we have to get to some level of stability so that we are not bouncing from crisis to crisis. Certainly a Cold War, a hostile stability on both sides, but one that is much more stable. And I think the trilateral framework for China, Japan, and South Korea is an important framework to continue that dialogue. And I hope it goes through to have that kind of sharing between those three crucial players in Northeast Asia.
Right, of course. Professor Kim, does the Yoon administration's security alliance with the Biden and Kishida administrations, against Pyongyang's provocations, of course, look to set it up against the Xi Jinping and Putin governments? Or do you see a two-track policy in which Seoul is able to balance its security interests with its allies, of course, and its trade interests with countries like China?
Yeah, that is possible, is my answer, because there has been a lot of internal debate on that. We fully understand. But at the same time, it is possible balancing both trilateral security partnership among the ROC, Japan, and the U.S. At the same time, to keep balanced good relation with the China and Russia as a neighboring country. So now the ROC government try to have a ROC, Japan, and China trilateral presidential summit as soon as possible, and keep a diplomatic channel with Russia and China as well. The ROC will do both jobs, and with the allies and neighboring country making a peace and increasing the security. So this is not easy, but at the same time, this is not impossible. And the Korea, US, and Japan, based on liberal democracy and shared value in human rights, is a very much needed partnership. And at the same time, the ROC is able to keep a good relation with China and Russia.
Right. So like you said, Professor Kim, it's not easy, but it's not impossible. I'll take that from today's talk. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Roehrig here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
My pleasure.
Right. And on that note, we end Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. As always, thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.